After my husband's funeral, my mother-in-law declared, "His $8 million estate belongs to me. You get nothing." Everyone went silent, but I smiled at the lawyer and asked, "Should I tell her? Or will you?" He said 3 words that changed everything. "My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 39 years old, and I manage a large apartment complex in San Diego, which means I spend most of my life dealing with leaking pipes, late rent, broken elevators, impossible parking complaints, and people who insist the smoke detector has been chirping for no reason while standing underneath it with a dead battery in their hand. I thought that job had prepared me for difficult people. Then I married Daniel Brooks and met his mother. 3 hours after we buried Daniel, Elizabeth Brooks stood in the tiled courtyard of Seabrier Court, the apartment building her family had treated like a private kingdom for more than 30 years, lifted her chin in front of 40 relatives, tenants, neighbors, and family friends, and announced that my husband's $8 million estate belonged to her. "You get nothing, Rachel," she said. Not quietly, not privately. She wanted witnesses. Daniel's sister Natalie stared at the ground. His uncle froze with a glass of iced tea halfway to his mouth. Even Michael Warren, the attorney handling Daniel's estate, looked like he had momentarily forgotten what polite society required of him. I still had Daniel's funeral program folded in one hand. In the other, I was holding a blue plastic key tag marked 14B because one of Seabrier's tenants had handed it to me 20 minutes earlier and whispered that Elizabeth had told everyone not to send rent to the usual account anymore. Elizabeth smiled at me. "You were his wife," she said. "I was his family." That one hurt more than I expected, but I didn't raise my voice. I looked at Michael. "Should I tell her?" I asked. "Or will you?" Michael closed the leather portfolio he'd been carrying all afternoon. Then he said 3 words. "8 million gross." Elizabeth's smile twitched. "Welcome back to my channel. If you've ever had someone confuse a big number with the truth, you'll understand why those 3 words mattered. But the number wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what we eventually learned Elizabeth had done to keep that number alive, and what it had cost Daniel before he died. When I met Daniel 7 years earlier, Seabrier Court was the first thing he warned me about. Not his mother, the building. We were having coffee near Balboa Park, and I'd asked what his family did. He laughed. "My mother would say, 'We're in real estate.' And what would you say?" "We own one old apartment building with good bones, bad plumbing, and an ego bigger than the Pacific." That made me laugh. Seabrier Court sat on a bluff, northwest of downtown, close enough to the water that tenants could smell salt when they opened their windows. It had 24 units arranged around a Spanish-style courtyard, with faded red tile, wrought iron balconies, old wooden doors, and bougainvillea that Elizabeth treated as if her late husband had personally invented flowering plants. Daniel's father, Robert, bought the building in the early 90s. By the time I met Daniel, Robert had died. Daniel had bought out other family interests, and Seabrier was his biggest asset. Elizabeth no longer owned it. That distinction would become important. She just behaved like she did. I knew within 6 months of dating Daniel that his mother was going to be difficult. What I didn't understand was the exact shape of the difficulty. Elizabeth wasn't loud most of the time. She was polished. She wore cream-colored jackets, low gold heels, and earrings that always looked expensive without being flashy. She remembered birthdays. She sent handwritten thank you notes. She brought perfect lemon cakes to church fundraisers. People described her as elegant. Then, in private, she would look at me carrying a stack of maintenance invoices and say, "You're so good with the little practical things, Rachel. Some women are simply born to manage other people's messes." The first time she said that, Daniel rolled his eyes. I laughed. That was my first mistake. Elizabeth learned early that I would absorb an insult if doing so kept the room peaceful. And I learned much too late that people who benefit from your silence rarely interpret it as restraint. They interpret it as permission. I'd been a property manager for 12 years when Daniel and I got married. I liked the work. I liked problems that could be named. A water heater was broken, or it wasn't. Rent was paid, or it wasn't. A contractor had shown up, or he hadn't. There was something comforting about buildings. Buildings didn't make you prove that you deserved to be in the family before they let you change a light fixture. About 8 months after our wedding, Seabrier's regular manager quit. Daniel was trying to replace him. Elizabeth called me that evening. "Just for a week," she said. I was standing in our kitchen, stirring pasta sauce. For what? Keeping an eye on things. Elizabeth, I have a full-time job. I know. You're very organized. That was Elizabeth's favorite trick. She could turn a compliment into a set of handcuffs. Daniel took the phone from me. Mom? Rachel doesn't work for Seabriar. I didn't say she did. You're asking her to do the manager's job. For a few days. A few days becomes 3 months with you. She went quiet. Then she used the weapon she saved for Daniel. Your father would never have left tenants stranded. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I knew that look. So I said, I'll check the emergency maintenance line until you hire someone. That was supposed to be all. Within 2 weeks, I was coordinating a plumbing contractor for Unit 6C, arguing about a security deposit deduction in Unit 17A, and finding a temporary repair for a courtyard drain that turned into a fountain every time Southern California remembered it was capable of rain. Elizabeth never paid me. Daniel offered. I refused. It's family, I said. I can admit now that this was my weakness. I had grown up in a house where usefulness was the closest thing we had to stability. My father disappeared when I was 12. My mother worked 2 jobs. I learned early that if I remembered the grocery list, watched my younger cousin, kept track of the electric bill, and didn't cause trouble, adults smiled more. By 39, I should have understood that being needed and being loved are not the same thing. I didn't. Not yet. For almost 4 months, I kept Seabriar functioning after work. When Daniel finally hired a manager, Elizabeth hugged me at Sunday dinner and said, See, we all contribute. Then she gave Natalie a designer handbag for helping choose new patio furniture. I got a candle. It smelled like linen. That should have been funny. At the time, somehow, it wasn't. The second time Elizabeth used me, the amount was $18,640. A plumbing line under Seabriar's north wing failed 2 days before Christmas. The emergency contractor wanted a deposit before starting. Daniel was out of state. The building account was temporarily short because of an insurance reimbursement delay. Elizabeth called me at 6:12 in the morning. We can't have tenants without water at Christmas. Of course not. Daniel's flight won't land until tonight. Then call the bank. They'll take ours. She paused. You have that emergency savings account, don't you? I remember staring at our Christmas tree while she said it. Daniel and I had been saving to remodel our kitchen. I had put most of that money aside before our marriage. You want me to front almost $19,000? For 48 hours. It became 6 weeks. When Daniel found out, he was furious. Not with me. With her. He reimbursed me from his personal account and told his mother never to ask me for money again. Elizabeth cried. She said she was embarrassed. She said she'd panicked. She said family shouldn't keep score. 2 months later, at Natalie's birthday dinner, somebody complimented me on my job. Elizabeth smiled across the table. Rachel's wonderful in a crisis. She's much more comfortable with invoices than people. Everybody chuckled. I did too. That was mistake number 2. By our 4th year of marriage, Daniel and I had developed a system around Elizabeth. He handled the emotional pressure. I handled the practical emergencies. We both pretended this was balance. It was really just division of labor. Then Daniel got sick. It started with exhaustion. He was 41 and healthy enough that we blamed work. Then came the bruising. Then night sweats. Then blood tests. Then the kind of appointment where a doctor enters the room with one extra person and closes the door before sitting down. Daniel had lymphoma. For the next 20 months, our world narrowed. Appointments, treatment cycles, scans, good numbers, bad numbers, waiting, more scans. He kept working far longer than he should have because Seabriar was carrying too much debt, and because Elizabeth kept telling him his father had never walked away from responsibility. I hated that sentence by the end. His father had been dead for 11 years, yet somehow Robert Brooks remained Elizabeth's most productive employee. Whenever Daniel wanted to sell something, simplify something, cancel something, or say no, his father's ghost got called into the meeting. Robert would have fought. Robert would have protected the family name. Robert would never sell Seabriar. Robert understood legacy. One evening, about 9 months into Daniel's treatment, he sat at our dining table with a stack of papers and said something I had been waiting to hear. I think I'm selling it. Seabriar. I put down the mug I was drying. Are you sure? No. That was Daniel. He rarely pretended certainty. But I'm tired, Rach. His voice cracked on that last word. I sat beside him. He showed me an offer from a regional housing company, $6,700,000. The buyer wanted the building, planned renovations, and would keep existing tenants through their current leases. After paying the main loan and closing costs, Daniel said we could wipe out the business line, put money aside for treatment and taxes, and still have enough left that he could stop working for a while. What does Elizabeth think? He gave me a look. That is why I haven't told her yet. I smiled. Smartest financial decision you've made all year. He nudged my shoulder. For about 2 weeks, hope entered our house. Not dramatic hope, ordinary hope. Daniel talked about sitting on our back patio, in the middle of a weekday. He said he might learn to cook something besides eggs. He ordered a guidebook about driving the California coast, even though we had lived in the state for years. That guidebook sat on his nightstand for months. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Daniel called me at work. The deal is dead. What happened? Buyer backed out. Why? They're saying ownership uncertainty. What ownership uncertainty? You own Seabriar? I know. He sounded exhausted. The buyer's broker had apparently received information that Daniel's health had impaired his capacity to complete the sale, and that other Brooks family stakeholders might challenge the transaction. Daniel was furious. He called the claim nonsense. But the buyer had another property under review, and walked. Who told them that? I asked. No idea. Elizabeth? Daniel was silent. That silence started an argument. Not our biggest, but one I still remember. You always think she's behind everything, he said. No, I think she's behind the things that sound exactly like her. She didn't even know I was selling. Are you sure? He pushed himself away from the table. I'm tired, Rachel, so am I. I don't want every conversation to become about my mother. Then stop letting your mother enter every conversation. He slept in the guest room that night. The next morning, I apologized first. I did that a lot. A month later, Daniel refinanced Seabriar instead. The new loan was ugly. Higher interest, stricter reporting, a larger balance than I liked. But he had medical bills, building repairs, and a business line coming due. Elizabeth called the refinance a commitment to his father's legacy. I called it what it was. Expensive. That was when the Blue Rent book first appeared. Seabriar's manager at the time, a man named Sean Foster, kept most tenant records digitally, but several older tenants still preferred paper receipts. Sean used a cheap blue carbon copy booklet for those payments. One Saturday, I was helping Daniel sort invoices at the building office when I found 3 receipts clipped together, Unit 4A, Unit 9C, Unit 14B. Each had been marked in Elizabeth's handwriting, Family Reserve. I showed Daniel. What's this? He frowned. I don't know. The amounts totaled $7,950. Did these go into the building account? They should have. They hadn't. Daniel called Elizabeth. She said it was a temporary rent reserve for property expenses. What expenses? He asked. She got offended. She always became most offended when a question was specific. Flowers, tenant gifts, small things, $7,950 in flowers? Don't be ridiculous. Daniel asked her to transfer the money back. 2 days later, $7,950 appeared in Seabriar's account. I assumed the problem was over. That assumption would bother me later because the blue receipt book had told us almost everything. We just hadn't known how to read it yet. Daniel's health declined the next spring. So did our marriage. Not in the dramatic way people imagine. There was no affair, no screaming fight, no one moved out. We just became tired enough to start believing whatever explanation required the least energy. Daniel believed I resented Seabriar. I did. He believed I wanted him to sell because I didn't understand what the building meant to his family. That wasn't true. I wanted him to sell because he was getting chemotherapy on Tuesday and arguing with roofers on Wednesday. Elizabeth encouraged the difference. She'd say things like, Rachel has never been sentimental about family property. Or, some people see a building. Your father saw continuity. Once, when Daniel was in the hospital, I overheard her telling Natalie, Rachel wants everything liquid. Easier that way. I walked into the room. Easier for what? Elizabeth didn't blink. For life. Interesting. She smiled. You always hear the worst possible version of things. No. You usually say the worst possible version. I just have decent hearing. That was one of the few times I pushed back. For the rest of the afternoon, she acted wounded. Daniel asked me later why I couldn't ignore her. That hurt more than her comment. For almost 3 weeks afterward, we barely spoke about anything that wasn't medical. Those were 3 weeks I never got back. Toward the end, Daniel seemed to understand that something about Seabriar was wrong. He just didn't understand what. 3 months before he died, he showed me a lender notice. Rental income was below projections. I knew the building. I knew the occupancy. 23 of 24 units were rented. The numbers should not have been low. Maybe concessions? He said. Not enough for this. I went through the operating statements. The missing amount wasn't consistent. That was what bothered me. Some months were short 11,000, some 17. 1 month nearly 30. There were maintenance charges I didn't recognize. Vendor names that looked familiar but not quite right. I did not investigate like a detective. I wasn't trying to catch anybody. I had a sick husband, a full-time job, insurance calls, medication schedules. I barely had enough energy to remember to eat lunch, but I started saving copies. That was what I knew how to do. Statements, notices, tenant ledgers, the blue receipt pages. Not because I knew what they meant, because I knew they didn't match. One afternoon, a tenant named Audrey Price stopped me in Seabriar's courtyard. She was 72, lived in 14B, and had the kind of memory that made lying around her dangerous. Rachel, did the bank change again? What bank? For rent? No. She pulled out her phone. Mrs. Brooks told me to send May's payment here. She showed me a transfer screen. The destination was not Seabriar's operating account. The account name was Brooks Family Reserve. I felt something cold move through my stomach. When did she tell you that? March, I think. Only you? Audrey shrugged. She said several of us older tenants were being moved because the new lender's system was confusing. The lender's system was not confusing. Elizabeth's explanation was nonsense. That evening, I told Daniel. He looked tired before I even finished. I'll talk to her. You said that last time. Rachel. Daniel, rent is going somewhere else. I heard you. Then why are you acting like I'm complaining about your mother's table manners? He closed his eyes. I instantly regretted my tone. That was our pattern by then. Elizabeth created the pressure. Daniel absorbed it. I reacted. Then I apologized for reacting. He reached for my hand. I don't have the energy for this. That sentence broke something in me, not because I blamed him, because I believed him. So I said, then I'll handle it. He opened his eyes. No. Why? Because she already thinks you're trying to take over. I'm trying to find $20,000. Please. That word stopped me. Please. So I waited. 3 days later, Daniel told me Elizabeth said only 4 tenants had used the reserve account, and the money had already been applied to insurance costs. Did she show you? No. Daniel? Rachel? That was the whole argument. 2 names. 2 exhausted people. Neither one willing to say what came next. A week later, Daniel went back into the hospital. He never returned to Seabriar. He died on June 18th. The last conversation we had about the building happened 2 nights before. He was awake for maybe 15 minutes. I was sitting beside him. His voice was barely above a whisper. Sell it. I squeezed his hand. What? Seabriar, you don't have to think about that. I'm tired of everybody living inside that building. I thought he was confused. Now I'm not sure he was. He looked at me. Promise me you won't keep fixing it for them. I said, okay. Say it. I promise. Then he asked me to turn off the overhead light. That was it. 2 days later, my husband was gone. Elizabeth organized the funeral like a state dinner. She changed the flowers I picked because mine were too cheerful. She rewrote part of the obituary because I had described Daniel as my husband before describing him as Robert and Elizabeth's son. She invited business contacts Daniel hadn't spoken to in years. At the funeral home, she introduced me 3 separate times as Daniel's widow, never Rachel. I kept telling myself grief made people strange. That is a useful sentence. It is also one people use to excuse behavior grief did not create. The reception was held at Seabriar because Elizabeth said Daniel would have wanted it. I knew he wouldn't have. But I had spent the previous 4 days choosing a casket, answering messages, signing forms, and trying not to notice that Daniel's shoes were still by our back door. I did not have another fight in me. So I agreed. At 4:20 that afternoon, Audrey from 14B approached me near the courtyard fountain. She looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry to bother you today." "It's okay." She held out the blue key tag to a storage closet Daniel had used for paper files. "Mrs. Brooks told me all rent goes to the reserve account now. But Sean said no. They argued this morning." "This morning?" Audrey nodded. "She told Sean she owns Seabriar now." Daniel had been in the ground less than 3 hours. That was the moment something inside me became very still. I took the key. "Thank you." 10 minutes later, Elizabeth gave her speech. She had gathered Natalie, Daniel's uncle, several cousins, Michael Warren, and a few longtime family friends near the fountain. She talked about legacy. She talked about her husband Robert. She talked about how certain people did not understand what Brooks family property meant. Then she looked at me. "Daniel always knew Seabriar belonged with his family." I said nothing. "So before this becomes ugly, Rachel, I think we should be clear." Michael started to speak. Elizabeth raised her hand. "No. This is family." Then came the sentence. "His $8 million estate belongs to me. You get nothing," Michael said. "Elizabeth." She kept going. "You have your career. You have your own accounts. You were married to Daniel for 6 years. I gave him 41 years. 7 years, actually. She always shortened our marriage when she was angry." Then she delivered the line that finally taught me what she thought of me. "You spent years carrying keys and calling plumbers. Don't mistake being useful for being an owner." Nobody moved. I looked at the blue key tag in my palm, then at Michael. "Should I tell her? Or will you?" He closed his portfolio. $8 million gross. Elizabeth stared at him. "What?" Michael's voice stayed calm. "The figure you keep repeating is the estimated gross asset value, Elizabeth." "I know what gross means." I almost smiled at that. Michael continued. "It is not the amount available for distribution." Her eyes narrowed. "Daniel's building alone is worth nearly $7 million. "Yes." "And the investments?" "Part of the gross estimate." "So I'm correct." "No." That one word irritated her more than anything else anyone had said. Michael looked around the courtyard. "This is neither the time nor the place to discuss estate administration." Elizabeth crossed her arms. She brought it up. I actually laughed. Just once. It escaped before I could stop it. Michael looked at me. I said, "Sorry." Elizabeth's face hardened. "What exactly is funny?" I slipped the blue key into my purse. "Nothing yet." That evening, Michael called me. He apologized for what happened. Then he told me something else. Daniel's lender had contacted him that morning. The death of the guarantor had triggered a routine review of Seabriar's loan. They wanted updated rent rolls, bank statements, insurance records, and authorization documents. Michael said the lender had already noticed discrepancies. "What kind?" "Rental deposits." I sat at our kitchen table alone. Daniel's coffee mug was still in the drying rack. "How bad?" "I don't know yet." "Does Elizabeth?" A pause. "I believe she may know there are questions." That explained the funeral speech. Not grief, not spontaneous anger. Control. She was trying to establish ownership in front of witnesses before anyone had finished asking who was moving the money. I told Michael about Audrey. Then I told him about the blue rent booklet. For the first time all day, his voice changed. "Do you still have it?" "Some of the pages." "Keep them." "I was planning to." "And Rachel?" "Yes?" "Do not sign anything Elizabeth gives you." I almost told him that was obvious. It turned out not to be. The next morning, Natalie appeared at my house with a folder. My sister-in-law had spent most of our marriage explaining Elizabeth to me. "Mom doesn't mean it that way. Mom's generation is different. Mom's still grieving Dad. Mom gets controlling when she's scared." Natalie was not cruel. That made her loyalty more frustrating. She was a decent person who had spent 40 years translating indecent behavior into acceptable language. She put the folder on my table. Mom wants you to review this. I didn't touch it. What is it? A family settlement proposal. Daniel died 5 days ago. I know. His lender hasn't finished the asset review. I know. Then why are you bringing me a settlement? Natalie sighed. She thinks if everyone agrees now, it avoids conflict. By everyone, do you mean me? She's upset. So am I. She feels like Sebrier is the last part of Dad. Your father has been dead 11 years. Natalie flinched. I regretted saying it that sharply. But I didn't take it back. She opened the folder herself. The proposal said I would relinquish any claim to management or control of Sebriar, in exchange for Elizabeth dropping unspecified claims against other estate property. It was vague. Very vague. Vagueness is expensive. That is one thing managing property teaches you quickly. I pushed it back. No, you didn't read all of it. I read enough. She thinks you're going to force a sale. I might. Natalie stared at me. Daniel would hate that. The words landed exactly where Elizabeth had trained them to land. Guilt. I almost responded defensively. Then I remembered Daniel in the hospital. Sell it. I folded my hands. Did he tell you that? What? That he would hate it. Well, no. Then don't speak for him. Natalie looked away. I softened my voice. There's something wrong with the building's rent deposits. She looked back at me. What do you mean? I mean the lender is reviewing them. Her expression changed. Mom handles some tenant payments. I know, they're probably just delayed. Maybe. I didn't accuse Elizabeth. I didn't need to. Natalie picked up the folder. As she reached the door, I asked one question. When Daniel tried to sell Sebriar last year, did your mother know? Natalie stopped. For half a second, she didn't move. Then she said, I don't think so. That answer bothered me. Not because of what she said, because of how carefully she said it. 3 days later, the lender's asset manager called me. His name was Andrew Peterson. He wasn't dramatic. I appreciated that immediately. He asked whether I had ever served as Sebriar's property manager. Unofficially, I said, which is a family term meaning without pay. He actually laughed. Then he asked about tenant payment procedures. I explained the normal system. He asked about Brooks Family Reserve. I said I knew it existed but had never authorized it. Mr. Brooks? I don't know. There was silence as he typed. Then he asked, do you have access to historic tenant records? Some. We are reconciling deposits against the certified rent roll. Are they off? Another pause. Substantially, that was all he would tell me. Over the next 2 weeks, the picture formed slowly. Not through a hidden safe, not through a dramatic confession, through boring questions. The kind people skip when they assume a respectable woman in a cream jacket must know what she's doing. The lender called tenants. The tenants answered. The lender compared rent rolls. The bank compared deposits. The insurance escrow company checked payment dates. Vendors confirmed invoices. Ordinary scrutiny did what years of family politeness had failed to do. It asked for numbers that matched. They didn't. At least 9 tenants had been directed to send rent into Brooks Family Reserve at various times. Some for 3 months, some for almost a year. Elizabeth controlled the account. Total transfers from tenants came to $286,400, but that wasn't all. Sebriar's books also showed reimbursements to Elizabeth for emergency property expenses, roofing, landscaping, tenant relocation costs, security improvements. Several vendors had never received those amounts. One invoice had been altered from $4,800 to $14,800. Another listed repairs to Unit 11C during a month when 11C had been vacant and untouched. The lender's preliminary discrepancy figure climbed past $400,000. I sat in Michael's office reading the summary. This is why Daniel kept covering shortages. Michael nodded. He appears to have believed operating costs were simply exceeding rent. He was sick. Yes. He wasn't checking. No. I stared at the page. The anger came slowly. Daniel had taken money out of investments. He had used part of our emergency savings. He had refinanced the building. He had apologized to me for financial stress he thought he created, and all that time, rent had been leaving through a side door, wearing his mother's name. Does Elizabeth know you have this? She knows the lender has raised concerns. That wasn't my question. Michael studied me. No. Not all of it. I closed the report. Good. Not because I wanted revenge. I wanted one thing I had not gotten in years. I wanted Elizabeth to answer before someone gave her time to manufacture the answer. The lender scheduled a mandatory ownership and management meeting at Seabriar. Not a courtroom. Not a law office. The building that mattered. Elizabeth loved that courtyard. She loved standing beneath the wrought iron balconies while tenants greeted her as Mrs. Brooks. She loved telling new people that Robert had restored the original Spanish tile. She loved being seen there. The meeting was set for a Tuesday at 11. Elizabeth arrived at 10:30. Cream jacket, gold earrings, leather folder. Natalie came with her. Michael attended for the estate. Sean Foster, the building's manager, sat near the office window. Andrew Peterson represented the lender. I came straight from work wearing navy slacks and carrying the old blue receipt booklet in my bag. Elizabeth looked me up and down. I see you've dressed for the occasion. I was at work. Yes, of course. Andrew began by explaining that the lender had completed an initial review of property operations following Daniel's death. Elizabeth interrupted him twice in 4 minutes. The third time, he stopped talking. She seemed surprised. He waited. Finally, she said, "Continue." Andrew placed a rent roll on the table. Seabriar reported an average physical occupancy above 95% during the review period. Elizabeth nodded. Excellent building. However, deposited rental income does not reflect that occupancy. Collection problems, Sean spoke. We didn't have collection problems. Elizabeth looked at him. You absolutely did. No. His voice was quiet. 2 tenants were late. That was it. She turned to Andrew. Mr. Foster has never been especially strong with accounting. Sean's jaw tightened. Andrew slid another page forward. 9 tenants confirmed that they were instructed to direct payments to Brooks Family Reserve. Elizabeth didn't move. Which is a property account. No, Andrew said. It is not. It was created for the property. It is held personally. Her lips thinned. For convenience. Andrew nodded once. Did Daniel Brooks authorize tenant rents to be diverted there? Of course. Do you have that authorization? It was verbal. When? I don't remember. Before or after his treatment began? Elizabeth's eyes sharpened. What does his treatment have to do with anything? I'm establishing timing. She leaned back. Daniel trusted me. I looked at her. For years, that sentence had ended conversations. Not this one. Andrew turned to Sean. Did Mr. Brooks ever tell you to redirect rents? No. Mrs. Hayes? No. He turned back to Elizabeth. 7 tenants stated that you told them the lender had changed collection procedures. I was simplifying things. The lender never changed collection procedures. No. But Daniel, the tenants were told the lender did. She hesitated. Andrew noticed. So did Natalie. The room changed a little. Not much. Just enough. Doubt had entered. Andrew moved to the reimbursements. Elizabeth dismissed them as bookkeeping errors. Then as timing errors, then as legitimate expenses with missing paperwork. Every explanation required the previous explanation to disappear. Michael barely spoke. Neither did I. Elizabeth finally looked at me. You've been feeding them this nonsense. No. You kept those receipts. I kept paperwork. You've always been obsessed with paperwork. I almost smiled. You used to like that about me when the pipes burst. Natalie looked down. Andrew slid a photocopy of an altered invoice across the table. Do you recognize this? Elizabeth glanced at it. No, Sean said. That's yours. She snapped her head toward him. What? You gave me that invoice. I did not. You told me to code it as emergency roofing. That's absurd. Sean reached into his own folder. I kept the email. Elizabeth's face changed. Very slightly. But I saw it. So did Natalie. Andrew looked at Sean. Why? Sean shrugged. Mrs. Brooks blamed me for missing cash last year. I started keeping everything. There it was. The problem with using the same scapegoat too often is that eventually the scapegoat starts saving receipts, Andrew continued. The altered invoices, the redirected rents, the account, the false lender instructions. Then he reached the issue that changed everything. Because diverted property income contributed to multiple covenant shortfalls, the lender will no longer accept Elizabeth Brooks as an authorized property representative. Elizabeth sat forward. You cannot do that. We can. I am Daniel Brooks's mother. That is not a management credential. I looked at the table. If I had looked at Natalie, I might have laughed. Elizabeth's cheeks flushed. This building belongs to my family. Andrew's expression didn't change. The borrower is Daniel Brooks's estate. Until the estate resolves ownership and loan obligations, all property operations will be handled through an approved licensed manager. Sean blinked. Elizabeth went still. What are you saying? You will no longer collect rent. Silence. You will no longer instruct tenants. Her hand tightened around her pen. You will not authorize vendors. Another silence. And you will not have access to the operating account. That was the first payoff. Not jail. Not screaming. Not applause. Elizabeth lost the thing she had been trying to seize since Daniel died. Control. She was sitting in the courtyard she treated like a throne room. And an ordinary lender had just told her she was no longer allowed to touch the rent. But the story wasn't finished. Elizabeth looked at me. You did this. I shook my head. No. You called them. The death review triggered automatically, Michael said. That's correct. You've been waiting for this. No. Her voice rose. You want Seabriar sold? I thought about lying. I could have said I hadn't decided. Instead I said, yes. Natalie whispered. Rachel, I turned to her. Daniel wanted it sold. Elizabeth laughed. A hard little sound. Daniel rejected a sale. I looked at her. He didn't reject it. He chose to keep his father's building. The buyer withdrew, because the deal was bad. I stared at her. I had never told Elizabeth the buyer's reason. Neither had Daniel, as far as I knew. Something moved in my memory. Ownership uncertainty. Other Brooks family stakeholders. Questions about Daniel's capacity. I asked, how did you know why the buyer walked? The room went quiet. Elizabeth blinked. I knew there was an offer. That isn't what I asked. Daniel discussed these things with me. No, he didn't. You don't know every conversation I had with my son. That's true. I leaned forward, but I know he never told you the buyer said the deal was bad. Natalie's face had gone pale. Elizabeth looked at Michael. This is becoming ridiculous. I asked the simplest question I could. Did you contact the buyer? No. Too fast. Natalie closed her eyes. I turned to her. What? She didn't answer. Natalie. Her voice was barely audible. Mom asked to use my email. Elizabeth stared at her daughter. Natalie. Everybody heard the warning in her voice. Natalie looked sick. Last year. Stop. You said Daniel was making a terrible mistake? Elizabeth stood. Natalie. Stop talking. That was the moment I knew. Not suspected. Knew. Natalie's eyes filled. You said if the broker thought there was a family dispute, they'd slow down. My hands went cold. Elizabeth shook her head. No. Natalie kept going. You said Daniel needed time to come to his senses, Michael said. Elizabeth, sit down. No, not sit down in my own building while... Andrew interrupted. This is not your building. That sentence hit harder than if he had shouted. Elizabeth sat. Natalie looked at me. I didn't know she told them Daniel wasn't competent. My stomach dropped. What? Natalie started crying. She said she needed an email address that didn't have Brooks in it. Elizabeth said. This has nothing to do with the loan review. Michael answered. It may have quite a lot to do with the estate. I barely heard him. I was staring at Natalie. What did she send? Natalie shook her head. I don't know. I gave her the password. I thought she was asking the broker to give Daniel more time. Why? Because Mom said Daniel was being pressured. I knew the answer before I asked. By who? Natalie looked at me. You. There are moments when anger is hot. That one was not. It was cold enough to make every detail sharp. The scratched conference table. The hum of the wall air conditioner. A seagull outside. Elizabeth's gold bracelet against her wrist, Daniel saying, "You always think she's behind everything." Daniel sleeping in the guest room. Daniel looking at me after the sale collapsed. Daniel thinking maybe I wanted something from him. 20 months of illness, and Elizabeth had taken some of the little trust we had left and spent it protecting a building. I looked at her. "You told him I interfered." She didn't answer. "You told Daniel I scared the buyer." "I told him you were pushing him too hard." "That wasn't the question. I was trying to protect him from selling an apartment building, from making an irreversible decision while he was sick. He needed the money. He had money. He rimmed thin even for $5 million because you made him panic." There it was, Elizabeth's reflex. Even cornered, she needed a scapegoat. I said, "You blocked the sale." I slowed it down. "You told the buyer he might not have capacity." I raised concerns. "Niemand kommt. You pretended there were ownership disputes. There were family concerns. You used Natalie's email." She allowed me to. Natalie flinched. I kept my eyes on Elizabeth. "And when the buyer walked, you let Daniel believe I had something to do with it." Her voice became quieter. "That was between you and your husband." I felt something crack inside me. Not loudly. Just enough. "For 3 weeks," I said. "He barely spoke to me. Nobody moved. He was sick. He was scared. He thought I had gone behind his back because you needed him to keep a building you didn't own." Elizabeth's face tightened. "You wouldn't understand. Try me. This was Robert's life." "No. Robert's life ended 11 years ago." She looked like I had slapped her. I continued. "Daniel was alive." Her eyes filled with tears. "For once, they didn't move me. You were going to sell the last thing his father built." "No. Daniel was." He wasn't thinking clearly. He was thinking clearly enough to know he wanted rest. "You wanted him away from us." "I wanted him alive." Elizabeth looked down. That silence said more than an apology would have. The second part of the lender review happened quickly after that. The first consequences did not. That's something stories often get wrong. Exposure feels dramatic. Consequences are paperwork. Andrew left with more questions. Michael requested records. Natalie changed her email password. Sean started redirecting every tenant to the official portal. Elizabeth was given written notice that she could no longer act on behalf of Seabriar. For 2 days, she ignored it. On the 3rd day, she made the mistake that finished whatever chance she had of preserving informal control. She went door to door. She told tenants the lender was mistaken. She handed out printed instructions directing rent back to Brooks Family Reserve. Audrey from 14B called Sean immediately. Sean called Andrew. Andrew called Michael. By that afternoon, the lender required Seabriar to retain independent third-party management as a condition of continuing the loan during estate administration. Not me. Not Sean. Not Elizabeth. A licensed firm with no family connection. Elizabeth's master keys were deactivated. Her office code was removed. The building staff were instructed not to accept her directions. That Friday, I was at Seabriar when she discovered her key no longer opened the office. She tried it twice, then a 3rd time. I was coming through the courtyard with one of the new managers. Elizabeth turned. "You changed the lock." The manager said. "The access system was rekeyed under the lender transition plan." Elizabeth ignored him. She looked at me. "You changed my lock." I almost corrected her. Then I realized the correction had already happened. It wasn't her lock. I said, "I didn't change anything." "Oh, meaner." She looked down now. "No." And I meant it. I was too tired to enjoy it. She looked smaller standing there. Not pathetic, not innocent, just smaller. For years, Seabriar had amplified her. It made her feel like the Brooks family matriarch. Without a key, she was simply a woman standing outside an office. She said, "Daniel would be ashamed of you." That used to work. I touched the blue tag in my pocket. "No," I said. "He asked me to stop fixing this for everyone." For the first time, Elizabeth had no answer. The financial review eventually put the diverted rents and unsupported reimbursements at just under $470,000. Nobody burst into the house and arrested Elizabeth. There were no television cameras, no dramatic handcuffs. Michael negotiated with her attorney. The estate preserved its claims. The lender preserved its rights. Elizabeth preserved as much dignity as her behavior allowed. But dignity could not refinance Seabriar. That was the problem. Between the main loan accumulated interest, deferred repairs, tax obligations, and costs tied to the estate. The famous $8 million estate was nowhere close to $8 million in spendable wealth. The number Elizabeth had bragged about at Daniel's funeral was real. It was simply incomplete. 8 million gross. Those words followed her everywhere. She had told relatives, church friends, neighbors. She had repeated that number so often that even I had started hearing it like a fortune. The eventual sale price for Seabriar was $7.15 million, higher than Daniel's old offer. For about 5 minutes, that felt like good news. Then came the deductions: loan payoff, interest, repair credits, taxes, closing costs, professional fees, the separate business line Daniel had secured against estate assets. By the time everything was reconciled, the estate was worth a fraction of what Elizabeth had announced. Still meaningful money, not a dynasty. The part that mattered to me was not the final check. It was the closing date. November 3rd. I sat in Michael's office with a pen in my hand and stared at the signature line. "You don't have to do it today," he said. "Yes, I do. Rachel, if I go home with this still open, I'll hear Daniel telling me to sell it all night." Michael nodded. I signed. Seabriar Court passed to the buyer Daniel had once tried to escape toward. A different buyer. Same freedom, I cried in the parking garage afterward. Not because I regretted selling, because Daniel should have been there. That is the cost nobody tells you about when the truth finally clears your name. You still lost the time you spent being misunderstood. You still remember the nights your husband turned away from you because somebody else planted doubt between you. You still don't get to go back and say, "See? I wasn't trying to control you." Daniel died thinking his mother was difficult. He never knew the full shape of it. I hated that. For a while, I even hated myself for not proving it sooner. Then Audrey called me, of all people. She said the new owners were repainting the courtyard and asked whether I wanted Daniel's old blue storage box before they threw it away. I drove over. Inside the box were old manuals, keys to locks that no longer existed, appliance warranties, and a stack of papers. Nothing dramatic, no secret confession, no hidden fortune. At the bottom was the California Coast guidebook Daniel had ordered after accepting the first offer. He must have brought it to Seabriar one day. A sticky note was attached to the cover. In Daniel's handwriting, it said, "Start north. No schedule." I sat in my car for 20 minutes holding that book. That was the day the story stopped being about beating Elizabeth. I had already won the practical part. The lender had removed her. The building had been sold. The money was accounted for. Her claim that I would get nothing had collapsed under the most boring force in the world: arithmetic. But winning didn't give me Daniel back. It gave me a decision. What was I going to do with the life he had spent his final months trying to clear space for? Natalie answered part of that question for me. She came to my house in December. She brought no folder this time, just coffee. We sat on my back patio. For a while, we talked about harmless things. Then she said, "I'm not speaking to Mom." I looked at her. "You don't have to tell me that." "I know." She rubbed her hands around the coffee cup. I kept thinking about the email. I waited. She used my address so the buyer wouldn't see Brooks. She knew exactly what she was doing. "Yes." And then she let me defend her to you. "Yes." Natalie swallowed. "She let me tell you Daniel would hate selling." I looked away toward the fence. "I remember." "She knew he'd tried." "Yes." Natalie started crying. Not loudly. I keep thinking about how many times I explained her. That sentence stayed with me. I said, "You learned to survive her differently than I did. That doesn't make it okay." No, for once, I did not rescue her from the discomfort. Natalie had spent years softening Elizabeth for everyone else. Now she finally had to see her mother without subtitles. That was the unexpected consequence Elizabeth never anticipated. She had been so afraid of losing Seabriar that she lost the daughter who had defended her hardest. Not forever, maybe. I don't know. People change. Boundaries change. Families find strange ways back to one another. But Natalie stopped taking Elizabeth's calls for months. She refused to let her mother stay at her home. When Elizabeth complained to relatives that Natalie had chosen Rachel, Natalie corrected them. "No," she said. "I chose not to be used." I heard that from Daniel's uncle. I never asked Natalie to do it. That mattered. Elizabeth tried one last time with me in January. She sent a handwritten letter. 4 pages. The first page was about grief, the second was about Seabriar. The third was about Robert. The fourth finally mentioned Daniel. She never apologized for telling the buyer he lacked capacity. She said she had acted out of fear. I believed that. Fear of irrelevance, fear that if Seabriar left the family, Robert's life would shrink into photographs and stories. Fear that Daniel's marriage meant she was no longer the person he consulted first. Fear that once the building was gone, no one would need her permission. Those fears were real. They also didn't excuse what she did. Understanding someone is not the same as surrendering to them. I did not write back. 3 months after the sale, I took 2 weeks off work. That was harder than it sounds. I had almost never taken 2 consecutive weeks off in my adult life. I packed 1 suitcase, put Daniel's Coast guidebook in the passenger seat, and drove north. No schedule. I stopped when I wanted. I ate terrible diner pancakes outside Santa Barbara. I spent one afternoon sitting near the water, doing absolutely nothing. The first hour made me anxious. By the third, I understood why Daniel had wanted it so badly. Stillness. A life where nobody called because a pipe burst in a building you didn't own. I kept my job when I came home. I liked my job. That surprised Elizabeth too, apparently. She had told somebody I would retire on Daniel's money. I didn't. I reduced my hours slightly. I stopped volunteering for every emergency. I stopped answering family messages within 30 seconds. I started saying, "I can't help with that," without attaching a 3-paragraph explanation. The first few times felt rude. Then they felt normal. The money I eventually received from Daniel's estate was enough to pay off our house, build a strong cushion, and create a small fund in Daniel's name that helps longtime tenants with emergency relocation expenses when older buildings are sold or renovated. Not millions, not a revenge fortune, something useful. Daniel would have liked that. I kept one thing from Seabriar, the blue plastic key tag from Unit 14B. The actual key was useless after the locks changed, so I returned it, but Audrey told me to keep the tag. "You earned that ugly thing," she said. "It now hangs on a small hook beside my kitchen door." For years, keys represented the same trap to me. If I could open the door, I was expected to solve whatever was behind it. Now that little blue tag reminds me of something different. Access is not obligation. Being capable does not make every problem yours. And being useful does not make you less worthy of being loved. Elizabeth had told me at Daniel's funeral, "Don't mistake being useful for being an owner." She was right about one thing. I had made that mistake. Just not in the way she meant. I thought because I could carry everyone's problems, I was supposed to. I thought love meant keeping the building running, fronting $18,640 for pipes, tracking missing rent, absorbing insults, apologizing first, and making peace before anybody else had to feel uncomfortable. Daniel's final request taught me otherwise. Stop fixing it for them. I wish I had understood sooner. I wish he had too. But peace rarely arrives in the form you expect. Mine didn't look like an $8 million inheritance. It looked like a sold apartment building, a useless blue key tag, a Coast guidebook with a sticky note inside, and a phone I finally learned not to answer every time it rang. The lesson I took from all of this is simple. When numbers stop matching, when stories keep changing, and when someone tells you that asking questions makes you disloyal, keep the receipt anyway. That little blue rent book couldn't bring Daniel back, but it reminded everyone that facts don't become disrespectful just because a family would rather not discuss them. That's my story. An $18,640 plumbing deposit, a blue 14B key tag, 9 redirected rent payments, and 3 words, 8 million gross, finally taught me that the most expensive thing I had been giving away was never money. It was access to me. If this story reminded you of someone who confuses your patience with permission, share it with them. And if you want more stories about families, boundaries, and the truths that eventually refuse to stay buried, leave a comment and subscribe.